we now offer health coaching to help you along your way. And then finally, if you're a clinician, there is our clinician's newsletter, The Future of Functional Medicine Review, which I'm very proud to say we've now had doctors who've read that newsletter find challenging cases in their practices, apply what we teach in the newsletter, and be able to help these patients who were otherwise considered challenging cases. Everything for these resources can be accessed through drruscio.com/resources. Alrighty, back to the show. One kind of final topic I want to have. I mean, there's many more questions I could ask because there's a lot here to unpack. I think this model is just fantastic. But head trauma is something that we have talked about on the podcast a few times. And one of the things there does seem to be a subset of with chronic digestive ailment patients is a history of head trauma. There's also a history of emotional trauma, a little bit different, but just to quickly acknowledge this for the audience, emotional trauma may really lend itself well to something like limbic retraining therapy. But there's also head trauma, and we discussed this with Titus Chu, who wrote the book Brain Save and has a really good kind of home-based neurological rehab plan for those who have had head trauma. And for some people, that can really be the difference between success and failure. We also have to be careful because some circles in functional medicine proclaim that everyone with IBS has a vagal nerve problem and has people doing all these exercises that don't really have any historical evidence to support that there is a problem there. So we want to be careful not to force a brain-based problem onto a non-brain-based population. But again, for those, especially with the history of head trauma, this really tends to land for some people. So, any kind of pearls, I guess, regarding head trauma?
Absolutely. So, there was a classic paper years ago by Dr. Gareth Roberts, and he looked at people who had very significant head trauma and who ended up dying of their head trauma within a week or two. And they had massively increased amyloid. The very thing that we associate with Alzheimer's was actually brought out by head trauma, which had not been realized before. So when you have head trauma, part of this response that you have is the production of the very thing that we associate with Alzheimer's disease. Now, for most people, they end up clearing that over time, but it tells you why these people are at increased risk for Alzheimer's. And so if you do have a history of head trauma, everybody, everyone who's had traffic accidents, who's had some head trauma, everyone who's played football, and everyone who's had any sort of significant, repeated, even mild head injury should be on a prevention protocol. We developed one that's called Precode for prevention of cognitive decline that you can get on. But there are others. You want to get on things that are absolutely will optimize the ability to reestablish these connections, because there is a tremendous amount you can do about it. Again, just as we've been told, there's nothing you can do about Alzheimer's. Cognitive decline associated with head trauma, whether it turns out to be Alzheimer's or not, there's a tremendous amount that can be done, and the earlier the better. You want to increase your trophic factor support. So actually things like whole coffee fruit extract, which increases BDNF, exercise increases BDNF. Things like Alcar, acetyl L-carnitine, which increases nerve growth factor, making sure that your hormones are optimized, making sure that your vitamin D is optimized. Obviously, this has come out in COVID-19. So important to have optimal vitamin D, optimal zinc. So this is the same thing for head trauma. Head trauma has a lot like the type 2, like the atrophic, because you're not supporting those synapses. In this case, of course, because of physical damage to them instead of chemical damage.
Now, with the Precode plan, would you say, and I'm asking this question mainly for the providers, let's say you are a provider and you're working on many of the things that, as I'm quickly pulling up the Precode plan, are listed in the plan. Kind of many of these foundational health applications, nutrition, inflammation, blood sugar regulation. Would the Precode plan be a good referral, or would there be a lot of perhaps redundancy, and should a clinician be looking for, if they're looking to complement their therapeutics with something that's kind of traumatic brain injury, or I should say head trauma specific, would you recommend someone finding a neurologist or a chiropractic neurologist or someone who would hone in and focus on that specifically, or would there not be much redundancy with the pre-code?
Yeah, good
plan?
point. So pre-code is specifically for people who are asymptomatic. So this is truly a prevention, and you can get it directly.
Gotcha.
You don't even need to go to your doctor. You can get it directly, myprecode.com. You'll get a 60 plus page report that's very much like Boston Heart would be for heart. This is the analogy for now anyone. This will tell you what are your major risk factors for cognitive decline. Here's how to address them. So that's critical for anyone who's got a family history, children of Alzheimer's, people with a family history of dementia, people 45 and over, anyone who's concerned about cognitive decline, because it's such a common problem. About 45 million of the currently living Americans will die of Alzheimer's if we don't do something about it. So prevention is step one. For those who truly have symptoms and who have had significant head trauma, then actually recode is much better. So that's reversal of cognitive decline. And you can get that, as I mentioned, mycognoscopy.com. And that does go into much more detail. Yes, it does look at some of these critical things like gut health and like glucose. So if you've done all of these things, then you may want to look at, what do I want to do in addition? But recode will tell you what are the things that are most likely to cause your decline in the future. Because, of course, if you've had head trauma, these others are still contributors. If you've got head trauma, but you're also exposed to specific toxins you're unaware of, or you're actually dropping your oxygenation at night that you're unaware of, things like that, these are things that can be nipped in the bud, that can be optimized to give you a better outcome for head trauma-related cognitive decline.
Fantastic. Well, Dale, this has been a really insightful call. Again, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that you're now identifying these subtypes, because I think, as the field progresses, we need to be more and more efficient with our care. And this seems like a great kind of heuristic to help clinicians parse all the components of the model. So just, fantastically well done. Is there anything you want to leave people with? And please mention again, any websites or books that you would like people to look at if they're looking for more information.
Absolutely. I think the key here is we can all work together to reduce the global burden of dementia. Let's make Alzheimer's a rare disease. It can be with what we know now. And you can find more information either in the book that just came out, which is called The End of Alzheimer's Program. The first book was The End of Alzheimer's. It's now available in 32 languages. The new one, basically, people had asked for more details. What websites, what workarounds, where do I go, what do I get, et cetera. So we tried to put all of that into the second book, The End of Alzheimer's Program. Just came out from Random House a couple of weeks ago. And then you can go to mycognoscopy.com if you're interested in prevention, myprecode.com, myprecode.com to get that, which is a less extensive program and actually does a great job with prevention without having to do a ton of different things, just as you indicated earlier. So thanks very much, Michael. Thanks for all the great work you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you again. It's been a real pleasure.
All right, take care.
You too.
Thank you for listening to Dr. Ruscio Radio today. Check us out on iTunes and leave a review. Visit drruscio.com to ask a question for an upcoming podcast, post comments for today's show, and sign up to receive weekly updates. That's drruscio.com.